What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a list of all the previously released games I would like to get to this year, that is to say older games that I would like to review, so I can check them out for myself in many cases, or simply take a trip down memory lane in others. I've already talked about the many new releases I'm looking forward to this year, even if it is a bit slower than 2023 was, but with that slightly slower pace comes the opportunity to explore the past, so to speak, as last year in particular I had more older games in mind, but the back half of that year turned out to be very packed with new releases and I had to put some of them to the side. With that in mind, I have talked about a few of these previously, so I'm going to try to breeze through those ones towards the beginning to try to avoid as many repeats as possible. But to dive into it and get the already known stuff out of the way, first up we have Oblivion. This is the one I am currently working on. A game I know very well, I just haven't done a full playthrough in almost 15 years. It contains some of my favorite quests. It's a charming, if incredibly awkward at times, open world adventure, and I'm having a blast with it. But before Oblivion, there was Morrowind. I'm somewhat ashamed to say that I have never finished Morrowind. I have played it a little bit here and there. I'm relatively familiar with its mechanics, but I've never actually sat down and fully finished a playthrough of it, and it's long overdue. Plus, that kind of game honestly just fits in super well with the channel. Any older game with obscure mechanics is kind of exactly my jam, and it's definitely one of the older titles that has passed me by that is honestly somewhat embarrassing for someone who reviews games, so I definitely need to get to it. Then we have Nioh 2, the, of course, sequel to Nioh. This one is going to be a lot, I am aware, as Nioh obviously was, and I'm interested in seeing how some of the mechanics changed. I know that they changed the living weapon to like a yokai thing, so I'm curious about how that's going to play out. But honestly, for the most part, I loved Nioh outside of a few random problems, so Nioh 2 seems like an easy enough win. Fourth up, we have Dishonored 2. I played the original Dishonored for the first time last year. Had a ton of fun with it for the most part, out of, again, just a few problems here and there. So I'm curious what is up with Dishonored 2. It seems to me that that game is a little more polarizing than the first one was, and while I'm at it, I'll probably do Death of the Outsider in the same video, even though that is technically a standalone game. Though after the fun I had with the first one, excited to dive into it either way. Fifth up, we have the last of the Witcher series. Now this is going to be an interesting one because I have already 100% The Witcher 3 years ago, which was a similar case for the other two Witcher games in that I had played them extensively already. So that one's really just going to have to be a playthrough to sort of jog my memory, get an idea of the specifics again, as it has been a little while since I've played through it, before making the review. So that one won't take nearly as long as you might think, but I do need to get to it, as the last thing YouTube needs is yet another YouTuber who can't seem to finish a video on Witcher 3. In the sixth spot, we actually have quite a few games, but they're all part of a similar series, that is to say the rest of the Geneforge series and the Avernum series, all from Spiderweb Software, and they are the last of what I would consider the really prominent CRPGs of yesteryear that I still need to cover. I've already done Geneforge 1, Geneforge 2, out of I believe 5 off the top of my head, is being remade. That's coming out early this year, so after I play that one, I'll then jump into the rest of the Geneforge series before then transitioning to Avernum at some point. Geneforge I've loved. It's about wizards that can shape life instead of just using normal magic, and I was really taken by the world of it in the first game, so I'm excited to play the rest of them. Avernum I know less about, but I know a lot of people enjoy that one, so I'm sure it'll be a good time. Moving right along though, then we have Phantom Brigade. This is a tactical RPG that came out in the early months of 2023 that I just didn't quite have enough time to cover. It involves a bunch of mechs and robots, more or less, duking it out, but it has what you could consider a hybrid turn-based and real-time with pause system. And while I don't know a ton about the details, I heard a lot of people talking about it, and it does sound intriguing, as I do think the TRPG space certainly needs a bit of a freshening up in terms of approaches and things. So I'm hoping this game can show me something new, even though it's probably going to be a little over a year old by the time I get to it. In the number 8 spot, we have the Drakensang series. Drakensang is based on the Dark Eye TTRPG that is very popular in Germany, and it has obviously gotten a few video game adaptations that I've heard good things about, though it's not a system I'm terribly familiar with. In any event, this is actually 2 games, Drakensang and then Drakensang the River of Time, both of which came out a little around 2010, one in 2009 2009 and the second in 2011, I believe. And I'm looking forward to these ones, if only to learn a new system that is foreign to me, at least. Getting close to the end now, we then have Grim Dawn, a popular ARPG that I have not personally played, though given my love for Diablo and ARPGs in general, many people have asked me to check out Grim Dawn. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's probably one of the most requested games for me to review. And it is, quite frankly, about time I got around to it. I've heard a ton of good things about it. It looks good. I'm excited to jump into it and play it eventually. Really, the only thing holding this one up is I don't know how long to allocate to it, or if I should even try for a 100% review as opposed to a regular one, because with ARPGs, it's always a little tricky. And Grim Dawn has gotten a ton of DLC content after its initial launch, so it's a lot to parse through, and that's kind of the main thing holding me back is the timing on it. But this year, it is finally time for Grim Dawn. Another game I've really needed to get around to, though, speaking of, is Gears Tactics. I've mentioned this one a few times, and it's coming up sooner on the list rather than later after I get through my initial batch of reviews for the year that'll probably be on the next round. And this is a tactical RPG based, of course, on the Gears of War franchise, but I have heard exceptionally good things about it, and as somebody who is very familiar with the tactical RPG scene, I'm excited to jump into it. It's something that kind of passed me by a little bit as it came out in 2020 when I was still actually working a regular job, and I'm not super into Gears of War, so it wasn't much of a challenge to simply overlook this one. And people have said enough good things about it that I've decided I need to get around to it, so it's definitely one of the games on this list that I have on a slightly higher priority than the others. Coming up with our second to last entry, though, we then have We Happy Few, an interesting title that has some pretty big moments in the beginning that I'm aware of, and then I believe there's some procedural generation involved as well, but it is basically about taking a drug called joy to fuel this sort of retro-futuristic dystopia that they're living over in 1960s England, which is an interesting enough premise, and it's a game I've wanted to play for quite some time, despite it being released all the way back in 2018. But the reason I'm finally making a commitment to checking it out is because their developer, Compulsion Games, is behind another upcoming game called South of Midnight that I want to check out, and I'd like to get a better feel for what they have done previously before I jump into South of Midnight, so the stars have finally aligned in We Happy Few's favor. Which brings me to my final entry on this list with yet another older TRPG. But this time we have Phantom Doctrine. This game takes place in the 1980s during the Cold War, and it aims to be a bit of a spy thriller in addition to the normal TRPG things, which makes for, I think, a pretty interesting premise, which has intrigued me enough to take a look at it. It is a game I will occasionally get someone asking about, though it is admittedly pretty rare, but after looking into it, I think it's intriguing enough that I want to dive into it and see it for myself. This one released back in 2018, and again, it's just one of those TRPGs I haven't played yet, so I need to get to. Which brings me to the close of this list. All of these games, combined with this year's new releases, are almost certainly going to keep me busy for most of the year, though I have left myself a little bit of room to try to wiggle in any surprises. As typically is the case with games, sometimes things get surprised announced or surprised drop even, though that is admittedly pretty rare. So I'm not trying to fill every slot of my available time over the next 12 months, but I'm hoping this will be enough to fill in a lot of the gaps between new releases, while also filling out the channel's back catalog of many games which I've already reviewed. I've spent probably the last couple years of just kind of plowing through games, both new and old, to experience kind of everything that many genres have to offer, including many things that I missed for myself due to one reason or another, not the least of which is because when I was a kid and all these games were coming out, I simply couldn't play them. So with that in mind, I certainly hope you'll be sticking around to enjoy this trip down memory lane for many of these titles, or simply tagging along as I continually seek to expand my knowledge of many video games. As a couple years into this, with over, I think like 150 reviews now, something like that, not to mention the many games I've checked out but didn't actually review, it's been quite the journey. And I hope you'll continue that with me this year in 2024. So with all of that said, that's pretty much all I've got for this video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you're looking forward to any of these reviews, or if you have anything to say about them, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.